Hey guys, and welcome back to part 2 of the 21st anniversary edition of the Mark II Robin. Let's get into it. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is probably just take the bonnet off just to give me a bit more clearance around the engine bay to work with. So to take the bonnet off is literally just one screw there, one screw there. Hopefully they're not seized and they should come virtually straight out, so that's a good sign in itself. Now with the bonnet off, we can get a lot better access to the engine. We're just going to pop these right back in there so we don't lose them. Now, one of the first things that I want to do on this is to replace the choke cable, because that's causing quite a big issue in starting. So first job, new choke cable. Now to get the airbox off, it's just two 13mm bolts or 1/2" bolts, and they come out fairly easy. Now the reason we're moving the airbox is so obviously we can get better access to the carb, which helps a lot because we can actually see what's going on. Okay, so that is the airbox off the car, and that looks a little bit rough. Not too keen on the idea of all this. As you can see, it doesn't look the best. So that's something we shall work with. So let's put these back in so we don't lose them, and set that aside. Okay, now looking at this choke cable, it looks like the cable is too long. So let's get that loosened and get this choke cable removed. Now hopefully you can see this piece here is your heater control valve. What I'm going to do with this car, and what I do with every car, is I always remove this heater control valve, and I'll tell you why. Because this hose comes from the rear of the cylinder head. The coolant travels through the cylinder head, comes out the rear of the cylinder head, comes forward here into your control valve, which goes into the heater matrix, which then runs back into the engine and the water pump. Now, the reason why I get rid of this is because when the heater valve is closed, which means you turn the heaters off, what happens is you actually stop the coolant flow coming from the cylinder head. So basically all the water in the cylinder head has nowhere to go. Now what this tends to do is overheat the rear of the engine, and you usually suffer with heat damage on cylinder 4 right at the back of the engine. Now what I prefer to do, and what I typically advise to do, is to remove the heater valve and have this constant flowing. So all your coolant circulates through the engine and then comes into your heater matrix and carries on in the coolant circuit. And then that makes the heater matrix actually act as a secondary radiator. And in order to turn your heaters on and off, well, you just use the electronic fan that's in there. So if you want the heaters on, you just turn the heater fan on. Done. So that's something I'm going to do on this particular car. Now, in order to change these cables, I need to remove the center console. And I'm also, because I'm removing the heater cable, I will be blanking this off with a nice little rubber grommet to make it look a little bit tidier. Now, these are fairly simple to get off. You just need to remove both screws here. One's already missing. And you will need to remove, for making it easier, remove the gear stick. Now you can do this in a way where you don't need to take the gear stick out, but it is a lot easier. It's no big problem. We're just going to pop the gear stick out, make sure she's in neutral, pop the C-clip out there, just like so, and there is a gear stick removed. Don't forget to get your C-clip as well, because if you lose that, guess what? You haven't got a gear stick. Now, in order to get to these better, what I'll probably do here is take the inspection panels off and get to the nuts on the back of these, which are on the inside. Now, because you have no access through the engine bay, the easiest part would be go through the inspection panels, which would be here. Now, since I'm this side of the car, it makes sense just to focus on this side. Okay, and that is one inspection panel removed. Now we're going to keep this one off because we need to get in this general area afterwards anyway. So I'm just going to get my hand behind, and these are pretty loose, so we're just going to loosen these out a little. So that is the choke cable. As easy as that. Hate them things. Now we take that centre console out, which leaves us this, because these have a nut on front and back. Now we're going to change that for ease of access, and there seems to be a brand new nut down there too. That's nice of them. So now we can get to both of these nuts. I'm going to do it another way that makes this a little bit easier if someone happened to need to do this again. Okay, and that is one cable removed, which won't be going back on. So that can go down there and stay there. So I've just rebuilt his original distributor because it's the correct code for the car. Now, the new distributor that he had was uncoded, and I don't trust these. So what I've done is I've taken some of the bits out of this one and put them into his old one. So this should now make the car run sweet as a nut. Also notice as well, bearing in mind this top plate was in the old distributor. Now, I noticed that the original vac pot was seized and wasn't working, but I also noticed the plate on this was for the blue point system. Now you can see that little pin there. Well, that will actually stop this top plate from turning with the vacuum advance. So the vacuum advance wasn't working on the original distributor. So with taking the top plate out of the new distributor and putting that into the old distributor, this whole thing now turns as it should. The new vac pot will work nicely and turn the top plate with the vacuum advance. So now that will all work as it should. So I'm going to put that on the car now and then crack on with the rest of the jobs. And I now have another problem. I need to take the radiator off to do the water pump, and well, I don't think these radiator nuts are coming off anytime soon. So it's time for my best friend, the angle grinder. So I've finally got a lot done to the car already. I've thrown on a lot of the new parts, and I'm just currently replacing the water pump. Now, for anyone who hasn't done that before, it's not as easy as just taking the water pump off. Let me show you. Now, in order to take the water pump off, you have to remove the radiator, and then you have to remove the radiator fan, and then you have to remove the fan belt, and eventually you get access to the water pump. Now, you have a bracket on the alternator which is connected to the water pump, so you have to take that bracket off and move the alternator out of the way, blah 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 blah. So let me show you how easy it is to take a water pump off. So, ta-da! That's everything you have to do. Now, the bolts on the radiator bracket were very corroded, and what I usually do is take the whole bracket system off the car completely. It's just a lot easier and quicker. Now, you can take the bolts off the side of the radiator and pull the radiator out that way, but you have very limited access to them bolts, and it is quite awkward to get your hands and your tools in there to take the bolts out. So typically what I do is get under the front of the car, with this being a Mark II, get under the front of the car, and you have 4 bolts, so 2 on each side holding the brackets in. Now I usually undo them and then pull the whole system out from the top of the car. Now, there's a modification that I do to these brackets to just help removing the radiator in the future a lot easier. A lot of the newer radiator brackets that you get are kind of done this way anyway, but I'll show you what I mean. So they are your radiator brackets. Now you can see these side bolts, you can undo them and take the radiator off that way, but with the way it sits in the car is very awkward, so I take these off instead from the front of the car. Now these are kind of spot welded in place, and as you can see there's no head on the top of these bolts, so when they get seized you end up having to cut them off like this. Now what I do is I get them on the bench, cut the heads off so they're somewhat like this, and what I will do is I will weld a nut onto this, and then when you are lining the radiator up, all you have to do is pop the bolt from the other side straight through and into that. So you really don't struggle that much. Now, because most of the bolts on these cars are Imperial, I actually replace these with the metric nuts and bolts. So in a sense, all I do is just weld a metric nut on here, so it'd be like an M8, and that just makes swapping the bolts out a lot easier because mostly everything is metric nowadays and it's a lot easier to get hold of than the old Imperial stuff. Now I've got the bolts in place and they are just simply held together with a nut on the top, nut on the bottom, and all I'm going to be doing, rather than going mad and welding all around, I'm just going to put a quick bead this side and this side on each one, and that shall hold these nuts in place and be absolutely fine to mount it. So let's get welding. Okay, now let that cool down, and once it's cool we'll check it out. So now it's finished, hopefully you can see what I have done here. As you can see, just a little bead on each side of the nut. So what will happen is you will have the radiator mount sit kind of like this, as this is the driver's side one. So this would sit like this, and your radiator would be in the middle, and your radiator will mount in, I think, to that one and that one. And then what you do is this goes up against the body of the car, and from underneath you just see the holes, pop your bolt through, and simple, just like that. That is the quick modification that I do, which, as long as they're greased, it does help to remove the radiator as a complete unit a lot easier than messing around trying to get down into the corners. Now it's time for the other side. Now I've got everything in place again and ready, and it's always best to keep in mind when you're doing stuff like this, always make sure that the things you are welding are clean. So make sure that the surface you're welding to is clean, and then the object that you'll be welding to that surface is also clean. So in this case, the nuts. Now I've got nice, clean, shiny nuts. Always best to keep your nuts nice and clean because, well, everyone likes clean nuts. Okay, so the radiator is finished. There's a few marks on it, but you'll see what I mean with the idea of the brackets. Now, doing it like this is just a lot easier because when, say this is the car, when the radiator slides in, it then will line up on the holes, and from the other side you just simply put the bolt through and she's in place. Rather than getting your arms down the side of the radiator, especially this side as it's closer to the edge of the car, plus you have the hose in the way, just get underneath the front of the car, undo 4 bolts, and then you just slide the radiator up. Now let me show you why water pumps are a real pain in the arse. Check this out. So you might think, oh, there's loads of room there to do the water pump. Easy, yes. As you can see, there are 3 nuts on the top. 1, 2, and 3. But you can't tighten that one fully because the bracket for the alternator is housed on that. So in order to set your alternator, you need to keep this slightly loose so the bracket can actually pivot up and down a little bit. Now, where do you think they put the 4th nut? Let me show you. Now that is a real silly place to put it. And you might think, oh,
That's not too bad. Yeah, it's right behind the pulley. So in order to get in, you have to either put your hand through this tiny little hole or up between the engine and the chassis. Now, if you put your arm through this hole, you can barely see where you're going. Underneath, you can get a finger in there. Luckily enough that if you're lucky. Now, you've got to try and put that nut on with one finger, two if you can fit it in. Not easy at all.
Great work, Reliant. Good thinking. Why don't they just make a removable pulley? That way you would have been able to get to the timing cover a lot easier as well. Hey ho, Reliant. Well guys, that's it for this episode. Join us next time on part 3 of the 21st anniversary edition Robin Mark II. I'll see you on the next one.